Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. But today, I want to talk about us, humans. We're thinking less. And I'll give you one guess as to why. Thank you very much, artificial intelligence. Now, Elizabeth Havalinka, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, my apologies, Elizabeth, of Salon, had a really interesting write-up of this. And quite frankly, we're starting to lack critical thinking skills, but it may not necessarily be as bad as we think it is. Because we all know that ever since AI came on to storm, ChatGPT, Copilot, yada yada, ChatGPT really the first one blowing up back in 2022, basically they've exploded in popularity. One survey recently conducted this past January estimated that more than half of Americans have used Copilot, ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude, or obviously a combination of it. If you're doing a Google search, you can't really escape Gemini anymore, right? So, research examining how these programs are affecting us is limited because, quite frankly, they're so new. But we do have some early studies that already are showing that it looks like they're impacting our brains. So, back in February, a study was conducted by researchers from Microsoft and Carnegie Mellon, and essentially groups of people working with data moved more efficiently with the use of generative tools like ChatGPT. And of course, right, it aggregates data, it's very fast at responding, et cetera, et cetera. But by virtue of that, that group of people were using less critical thinking skills than compared to a group of workers who didn't use those tools at all. I'm sure they were faster, more efficient, accomplished their tasks faster, but they were letting the machines do the work for us. Now, it's interesting because the more that workers reported trusting AI's ability to perform the tasks for them, the more critical thinking was actually reduced by those people. Another study in 2024 basically reported that the reduction in critical thinking stemmed from relying on AI to perform a greater portion of the brain's work necessary to perform tasks in a process called cognitive offloading. In other words, we don't have to think about it, we just have to type in the prompt and let the computer think about it for us. Now, cognitive offloading is something we do every day when we write our shopping list, for example, so we don't have to remember the 10 things that we have to pick up at the supermarket. We make an event on a calendar, which I live and die by my calendar. If I had to remember every meeting I was in, with meeting IDs for Teams and Zoom and like all this kind of stuff, I would never be able to do it. Or even use a calculator to essentially calculate, let's say, add two numbers together. You don't have to think about it. You're offloading that thought process and that logic and that desire to retain that memory into something else that you trust or rely on. So to reduce our brain's work offload, we can offload these tasks now to technology, which are now starting to perform more complex tasks. I've said it before, but if you think about it this way, artificial intelligence is the very first invention that humans have created that can actually think and execute for themselves, for itself, right? That's a huge advancement in humanity. But the thing with this, with cognitive offloading, is also been linked in other research to having worse memory, meaning because we're offloading so much, we're just forgetting things. Now, a review published in March concluded, and I quote, "Although laboratory studies have demonstrated that cognitive offloading has benefits for task performance, it's not without its costs." So it's handy, for example, to be able to rely, on your brain to have the grocery list, but quite frankly, that's not what we are doing, right? So the question then becomes how much cognitive offloading is good for us, and how is AI or artificial intelligence actually accelerating that cost of our memory retention? So for the record, this concept is not new. If we go all the way back in the day to the Greek philosopher Socrates, he's in the index as Socrates, he basically was afraid that the invention of writing would make humans dumber, because we wouldn't exercise our memory that much. If we're not writing it down, we're going to have to basically remember everything. I think he might have went senile at the end. He famously never wrote anything down, but the interesting thing was his most famous student, Plato, absolutely did. And so some argue that Socrates was right, and the trend is escalating with each major technological advancement. We are increasingly relying on these tools outside of ourselves to perform tasks we once accomplished in-house in our minds, including memory retention. Many people may not perform routine calculations in their head anymore due to the calculator. Most of us use a GPS as opposed to like pulling out a map or having to like look at physical markers on the highway. Now, the interesting part about it is I actually do a little bit of both. I like to add up numbers in my head, and when I am, let's say, in a rental car, because I don't sync my phone, you shouldn't do that. I've done segments on that. So I'm, let's say, looking at a GPS, and GPS says, oh, it's 20 miles down the road. I look at the odometer, and then I basically turn the GPS off and say, okay, in 18 miles, or 30 kilometers or whatever, I'm going to pick up my phone and then I'm going to look at it, for the next turn. So I've got some of that manual stuff because that's how I grew up, right? You had a paper map and it said, oh, from this point to this point, it's about 20 miles. You look at the odometer. When you got to about 18, you're going to have to look at the map again, right? So that's what we're talking about. But there is no doubt that these inventions like the calculator, GPS, etc., are making us more efficient. There's no doubt of that whatsoever. But the concern lies in what happens when we stop flexing those parts of our brain stems that are responsible for these tasks. Over time, some are arguing now, due to the research, that we're going to lose those abilities. It's almost like we have our cognitive ability that kind of atrophies because we're outsourcing it or offloading it to an artificial intelligence, a GPS, a calculator, even a shopping list. So there's an old ethos of use it or lose it that may actually apply to cognitive tasks as well. But here's the thing. Despite concerns that calculators would destroy our ability to do math, research over time, because we've had calculators for a long time, have genuinely shown that there is little difference in performance when calculators are used or when they're not used in terms of our cognitive ability. Some have even been critical that basically the school system will generally spend so much time teaching students foundational techniques like learning the multiplication tables. 12 times 12 is 144. But if we're spending all that time learning multiplication tables when we can solve those problems with a touch of a button, then kind of what's the point there? On the other hand, though, others are arguing that part of the curriculum, and I agree with this, is important because it provides the foundational mathematical building blocks for which students learn other parts of math and science. I literally just talked about this with college students, how essentially they're going from point A to point B and letting the chat GPTs of the world write their essays, and by virtue of that, they're not gaining that knowledge. They're not gaining that experience. Well, we also now see that is basically cognitive decline as well. If you don't know how to research things, you don't know how to look up things, and you're relying on technology, what happens when the technology goes away or it's restricted, right? I mean, imagine for whatever reason, our technology was censored here in the United States, and essentially we couldn't use it. We couldn't access sites. We couldn't get to, let's say, a GPS because for whatever reason, all the GPS was down. Right? Just a theoretical, now we're going to have to go back and rely on these things. And we have a legion of the new generations that really don't know how to use a map or understand mile markers on the road or any of these things. And so I think it's an interesting one. I think that, I think there's a real possibility that we have some cognitive decline here in that sense, but we also have to keep our minds active. So do puzzles, read books, do all those kinds of things. Figure out some math problems in your head. It's not going to hurt you. It's only going to make you stronger. And so, while we're using AI, make sure we're not atrophying ourselves. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, where you will rot your brain. Same with YouTube as well, except when you watch or listen to me. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private, secure, and informed. Take care.